Hello, hello. Welcome to my second live on Instagram. My name's Pan, and today I have a very special guest with me. His name is Will, Teacher Will. He's going to be joining me soon. So I'm just going to wait for him to send me a request, or maybe I can send it to him actually. Just a second. Here we have Teacher Will. Well, Teacher Will is coming in, and
Good evening, good evening, good evening in your time
hello.
zone. How are you?
Hi, Teacher Will. Hi.
How are you?
I'm really well. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, thank you very much.
Fantastic. Can you hear me well?
I can hear you.
Fantastic. Great. I can see you. I can hear you. So, welcome to my very second live on Instagram.
All right.
So,
Listen, before we get started, teacher, let me say thank you very much for inviting me to your page to be part of your live stream, your second one. It's greatly appreciated, and I'm humbled for the opportunity to speak to you, your followers, into the ATW family. I don't get invited often, which is fine. I don't get invited often to participate in live Instagrams from teachers, so thank you very much for the invitation, and I hope people get value from this.
thank you so much for coming. Thank you so much for accepting my invitation, first of all. And really happy to have you here. Before we go on to introduce ourselves, I'd like to just give a quick outline of what this live is going to be like for everybody to know what we are doing today. And then you can tell us a little bit about you, give us some information. But first, yeah, so in today's live, the idea is for me to be giving out some statements to, by the way, parenthesis, do you prefer people to call you Will with your first name or Teacher Will? I'm not sure if anyone else asked you before.
At the end of the day, whatever people feel comfortable with. So I'm not that much of a stickler. They can call me Will, they can call me Teacher Will. It doesn't really matter to me.
Fantastic. Well, I'll call you Teacher Will then, like your page to be promoting your page at the same time. So, well, thank you so much. And well, in today's session, what we're going to be doing is I'll be giving out some statements to Teacher Will. These statements are all related to learning English or in general, learning any other language. They can be adapted and adjusted to any other language. And well, he's going to be giving us his opinion about these statements. These statements are maybe some students' opinions or other teachers' opinions, or generally what I've listened to throughout the years in my experience. It doesn't mean they are true. It doesn't mean they're false. It could be, any answer could be right or wrong. It's just listening to somebody else's opinion. And well, while Teacher Will is answering the questions, I'll be taking maybe a couple of notes or maybe some interesting vocabulary that he might be using or a couple of expressions. And then maybe, if we have time, we can talk a little bit about those as well. And at the end of the live, the last 15 minutes, we could have maybe a Q&A session as maybe for about 10 to 15 minutes. You can ask us some questions and then we can help you if we can. So, well, thank you so much again for everybody who's here. And let's go to Teacher Will. Teacher Will, who are you? Tell us a little bit of information about you.
Very quickly, my name is Teacher Will. I'm from the United States of America. My mother tongue happens to be English. Who cares, in my opinion? I was in the Gulf in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia for over a decade offering training and development programs. For those of you that are part of the ATW family or have asked, oh, do you wear thopes in America? Yeah, I wear a thope, even though I'm not Arabian or from Saudi. In any event, so yeah, that's just a little bit about me. I have a theme this year, and the theme, if you're part of the ATW family, is New Year, New You. If you don't necessarily make the necessary changes in 2023 relating to your personal life, your professional life, or particularly English, 2023 will be just another year. So Hopefully, I motivate people and inspire people to achieve their English goals, and I'm honored and humble for people that choose to follow me. Final statement I would say is when we get into the questions, Teacher Pan said something very interesting, which I just want to elaborate on briefly. The following statements, when she asked me questions, are my opinion, my truth. Opinion is just that. It is my opinion. So maybe there's some things that I might say that you agree with, some things that you disagree with. That's fine. It's just my opinion. Whatever the questions that are asked, what I would encourage you to do is find the answer, find the truth, and develop your own opinion. Thank you, Teacher Pan.
Thank you so much. You have explained everything very clearly. I also have to say that I'm very honored to have you here with me today. I've followed your account for a while now, actually, before I even started posting anything on Instagram. And I do have to say that I don't know you personally. I've never seen you in real life, right? Just on Instagram. And you seem to be a really inspiring and motivating teacher, which is what we need nowadays. Lots of motivating and inspiring teachers. And yeah, if you don't mind, could you tell us what I mean, we can see it here, but your Instagram handle is just for people to
Sure,
follow
I'll,
you.
I'll type it in the comments section. So on my social medias, that is my profile, Teacher Will, ask_Teacher Will. So I'm on Instagram and YouTube. So if you want, whether it's myself, and I would encourage the ATW family, if you don't follow Teacher Pan, to do as likewise. But that's my handle. So if indeed you choose to follow me, understand again, it is my truth, my approach, my perspective on teaching. If you like that, that's great. And if you don't like that, that's great as well, because you have choices. Why? Because social media is a choice and it's for free. But
Absolutely.
thank you very much for the compliment. I'm appreciative. I'm really appreciative about that.
Exactly. Totally. We totally agree. Absolutely. Well, just a quick introduction about me as well. My name's Pan, as some of you may know. I'm an English teacher. I teach online. I'm a full-time English teacher. I do most of my classes on Zoom. I teach one-on-one classes in general, mostly. And well, I come from Cyprus. It's a little island in the Mediterranean, a very beautiful country if you're ever interested in visiting. And well, I currently live in Spain. I've been here for a while, another lovely country to visit. And yeah, I really enjoy teaching and being and having the opportunity to also offer help and content and knowledge to people online for free. I think it's fantastic to have this opportunity nowadays. And well, right, shall we start with our statements? By the
Okay, I'm
way,
ready.
Teacher Will, you
Yes,
have
ma'am.
no idea what I'm going to
Yeah,
tell
I
you
don't
here,
know.
right?
I don't know the question. So I was like, okay. And she actually, before we talked in transparency and honesty, Teacher Pan said to me, "Hey, do you want the questions ahead of time, or do you just want to be surprised?" And I was like, "No, Teacher Pan, thank you. Just surprise me." So I'm ready. I'm ready.
Let's go, let's go. So, the first statement is the following. Again, let me repeat for those of you who've just joined in. This is not a statement that is true or false. It's just a statement, okay? And Teacher Will is going to tell us what he thinks about it. So, the first statement is the following. A good teacher corrects all your mistakes. What's your view on this one, Teacher Will?
My opinion is the following. I disagree. I think it is important, particularly if someone is learning a language, in this particular case, English. My approach is to be a facilitator, a coach, and a guide. And if indeed I choose to correct a learner's all of their mistakes, in my opinion, it might make the learner feel less than or not a sense of progress. So I would say all. It means, for those that don't know, it means 100%. So no, I don't believe in correcting a learner's all of their mistakes. I think it's important if you see particular trends or particular things that a learner might be doing as it relates to pronunciation or grammar, I think it's kind of, my approach is kind of to like say, oh, really? Oh, particularly last point. Um, I think my approach is when one gets to the higher levels of proficiency, I think I will do that more than in terms of someone just learning the language. So if I'm just learning the language, I want someone to speak. So all mistakes now.
Not all mistakes. Would you, for example, in your classes, would you um, interrupt students at certain points to point out a mistake, for instance, or would you wait for them to completely finish what they are saying and then point out, some corrections or give some recommendations?
Great question. To be honest with you, I think I've done both, regardless of the learners. And what I'll kind of like, so for example, let's say, for example, I'm talking about something I did in the past, right? And I said, oh, I eat capsa. I'm like, you eat capsa, or you ate capsa, or I might do like a listening technique and say, okay, so you said that you last week now past or present, and they'll say past. I'm like, so eat or another way of saying it. So it depends on the student, but I've done it,
Right.
um, both occasions.
Yeah, I think it's quite important to also keep this flexibility, right? Because not everybody reacts to corrections in the same way, or not everybody, maybe if somebody corrects you, maybe then you kind of lose your train of thought and you can't keep going. So I think it's nice to also experiment, just experiment with different students, different levels, different moments of the conversation, and see what works for each student. I think that's, for me at least,
No, I
that's
definitely agree. I definitely agree. And why that's important is because teaching English, learning a language is an individual aspect, and people learn differently. And so that's why I think for people that decide to make an investment in themselves in terms of finding a training and development course, in terms of finding a course or a teacher, whether it's face to face or online, it's really important that a person explores, research, do their due diligence. So again, teaching is a partnership. And so if you're a teacher, you have to understand or have the opportunity to understand the way in which your student learns. So I love the word that you say, flexibility, being flexible, being adaptive, being able to be attuned to understand what your student needs when he or she needs it.
absolutely, absolutely. Okay, thank you so much. Do you know what? I'm not very multitask. I haven't been able to write down anything that you, because I try to really pay attention to what you're saying, and I'm trying to be a really good listener here, so I
No
haven't written
problem.
anything down.
It's fine.
But let me ask you one question about something you said at the beginning, where
Yes,
you
ma'am.
can explain to us maybe what exactly, this is not related to this answer, but what exactly is a thobe? You said the word
Oh, a
thobe at the
thobe.
beginning.
Yeah. So hold on a minute, because I'm in a car. Hold on. So
Are you in your
I,
car? You're in a parking space.
yeah, I was because I was out, and but anyway, so I knew we had the call. So anyway, I lived in Saudi Arabia for 11 years, and so a thobe is the traditional. I don't know if you can see it, but it's traditional dress that they wear in Saudi Arabia. So, I lived
Wow.
in the Gulf for 11 years. So, when I came back and I'm in Chicago now, a lot of the ATW family and people in the Gulf or Arab affiliated, they were like, "Oh, Teacher Will, do they wear thopes in America?" And I'm like, "Yeah, they do." And they wore them actually even before I came here. But I wear Western clothes and Arabic clothes, so I have a thope on. So yes, if you're part of the ATW family, you can check my Instagram story and you'll see the full length thope. So
Well, that's very interesting. Thank you so much. Is there any particular reason for wearing this kind? For example, is it to do with the weather, for instance, or?
well, no, I because I wear both. I just felt like wearing a thope. It's actually pretty nice in Chicago today. In terms of it's like, well, we have a warm streak. It's like 15 degrees Celsius. So I'm like, oh my
Oh,
God.
is that warm?
Yeah, for Chicago in February. Yeah. No, I just felt like wearing it, and I'll spell in the chat section. Someone asked the spelling of thope, so I'll put it in there. But no, I just felt
Oh,
like wearing it. That's all.
fantastic. That's lovely. Thank you so much for your explanation. Are you writing the spelling?
I put it in there. Someone asked the question.
Oh, okay. I actually didn't know how to spell it. I
Yeah,
had heard about this a specific garment in the past, but I don't really know a lot of information about it. But thank you so much. It's really interesting to be learning about well, anything that's new and anything that's different to us. I think it's always interesting to know about. So thank you
definitely.
so much
You're
again.
welcome.
Right. Shall we go on to the second statement?
Yes, ma'am.
Let's see. For example, we've got, right, this one. Learning grammar is unnecessary. Many people have learned English really well and sound natural without having opened a grammar book in their whole life.
Great question. So I believe my perspective on the following: grammar is important. It is part of the English language. I think what happens is my opinion is grammar is important. What becomes even more important from my perspective is how you, as a teacher, teach grammar, and as a student, how you learn grammar. Oftentimes I think what happens is that when I'm teaching and offering courses, I try to relate it to whatever a student's mother tongue is. The way I teach grammar, it's part of overall fluency. So I'll ask the student, I'm like, hey, what's your native language like? Is it Chinese? Is it Arabic? Is it French like I speak? And they'll tell me whatever the language is. And I'm like, when did you become fluent in your mother tongue? And they'll be like, oh, 5, 6. I'm like, great. And then I
Mm,
was like, so when you were becoming fluent, you learn grammar, right? Like you learn like the times, you learn like certain like on or in or from. They're like, yeah, yeah, yeah. So I'll be like, well, grammar becomes like it's part of your language. So then I'll say, well, when did you become fluent in grammar in terms of learning the former grammar rules, right? So I'll use myself. Listen, I've been fluent in English since I can remember, so maybe that's like 5, and fluency is a continuous process. But I didn't learn the formal rules of grammar, whether it was idiomatic expressions, whether it was conditional statements, whether it was verb tenses, until I was like much older when I was in high school. So what I think is important is, and why often people are afraid of making mistakes and they're afraid of grammar, is because my opinion, solely my opinion, is that they're learning grammar in the wrong situation and context. The way I teach
mm,
grammar is I teach grammar as part of overall fluency and naturally and intuitively. So, for example, if I'm teaching a beginner, for example, I'm like, oh, I'm going to the store, or I'm listening to a live Instagram, and then what I'll do is I'll use situation context first and then explain the grammar rules.
mm,
That's my approach. There is something in our industry called the grammar translation approach. That is a particular approach that's utilized. My opinion is that is not the opinion I use, because I think you learn grammar naturally, intuitively. So even if I sit back and say, it's kind of like, oh, you know what? What will you do next year? What will you do 2 months from now? I will go to America, or I am going to go to America. So if I say I will go, is that now past or future? And then they'll say future. So I'm like, oh, in the English language, we have a verb tense. So grammar is important. It's part of the English language, but I would encourage students to learn grammar in context, situation, how it applies to their life. And as a teacher, as you said earlier, is to be flexible in your teaching approach, depending on how you teach grammar and whatever is the particular graded language or grammar concept that you're trying to teach.
definitely. Yeah. Totally, 100%. I agree 100%. Just a little bit of input from my experience as well. In my case, for instance, yeah, again, it depends on the student because sometimes students say, for example, oh, Pan, what's the grammar behind this certain point? Or can you explain to me a little bit about the theory? Because I know how to say this kind of thing, but then I'm not really sure when to use, well, not right now, I can't think of a certain example, but sometimes students ask me to explain the grammar point behind it because they feel more comfortable and sort of like more confident or safer if they know, if they really understand why a certain thing is a certain way, why we
Yes,
say a
yes,
certain thing a certain way, right?
yes.
Um, But then on the other hand, there are lots of students who really don't want to know anything to do with what this specific grammar point is called, for example. So it really depends on the individual. And maybe, for instance, well, sometimes what I say to my students is, you know what, you don't really know. If I see that a student, for example, gets a little bit frustrated or a bit anxious about not understanding a lot how that grammar point works, I then just focus on repeating maybe and then practicing repeating in different situations until they know how to use that grammar point. And then I say, you know what, don't worry too much about knowing exactly what to name this thing, because probably nobody's really going to ask you what this grammar point is called, right?
No, very true. Two quick points. Number one is that there are people out there that love, they're grammar lovers. Most people, I had a student, for example, when I was in Jeddah, they love grammar, and so we were doing verb tenses, and they really wanted to know like what the grammar rule is because their brain was more, they were very systematic and very logical. So
Exactly.
what my first point is that you have to know the student. Again, it's flexibility. Point number two is I would say there is, for those people that particularly want to know and have an understanding as it relates to verb tenses, because there are over 10 different verb tenses in the English language, a very good resource that I would tell people to look at, and I've done previous content and videos on it. There's a website called EnglishPage.com, and it will give you every verb tense in the English language from like I am William to I have been or I will have been learning English so from present simple to future perfect continuous. So there are resources out there. It ultimately, to your point, it just depends on the student.
Exactly, exactly. Great. Thank you so much. Also, Teacher Will, when you do your live sessions, do you pause? Because I'm quite new at this, so I would like to get your input on this one as well. Do you take a moment to read what your viewers are saying? Because I cannot do this.
Yeah,
I
no,
find
I
it
did.
really hard.
So to your point, I love the word that you talked about, flexibility, adapt, being adapted, being responsive to the needs of the students. So to answer your question, I will do a combination of both. I will do a myriad of both. I will do different components. See, I'm trying to teach you a vocabulary. So to answer your question, yes, I did. There was an earlier caller that said, because I'm your guest on your live, so I'm being respectful. There was a guest on earlier that's been joining the live and said they were afraid of making mistakes. What I would say is this: making mistakes, in my opinion, I make mistakes in English. I make mistakes when in French. Making mistakes are part of the learning process. Don't be so afraid of making mistakes, and mistakes don't always last. That's the first point.
Mhm.
Second point is that listen, it's a normal, common courtesy. It's a so many learners, people learning English, they're afraid of making mistakes. Okay, let me relate to your mother tongue, whatever it is. You made mistakes in your mother tongue, you just don't remember it,
Mhm.
right? So English is no different. If you're not making mistakes, my final point is this: mistakes don't always last. So if you're not making mistakes, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're applying mistakes. Mistakes do not always last. Be willing to get out of your comfort zone. And in that, if you choose to be, or you choose to watch people on social media, or you choose to invest your money in a teacher, be mindful of the content that you absorb, because in my opinion, if you follow a teacher that's so focused on, making mistakes, then you're doing yourself a disservice. Making mistakes are part of the learning process. The mistakes are not always going to be there. So practice makes permanent. So it's a normal occurrence, but you don't always won't make mistakes.
Well, that's actually quite lovely. I really like this advice. Like mistakes are temporary, right? Like everything's temporary, really.
Definitely. So many
Yeah,
learners are so, oh my God, I can't speak because I make a mistake. Then how are you going to improve your speaking if you don't speak? It's like what
exactly.
Parsa just said. Have fun with the language. Be willing to adapt. Be willing to, get with the program. Mistakes don't always last. Some of y'all are so afraid of speaking because it's like, I'm making a mistake. And then what? And then what? And then what? The more you talk, the more you make progress is less mistakes that you make in terms of that. So it's just like, be willing to go through the process and just do it.
Absolutely, absolutely. Somebody said the more you talk, the more you confident you become, the more you become confident. Absolutely. Your confidence
Exactly.
increases the more you speak, right? Somebody else
Exactly.
said they are learning Greek and they always make mistakes, but they have fun with it. And that's great to have fun with any language that you're learning. Absolutely. Great,
Exactly.
good. Shall we go to the next statement?
Okay.
Let's continue. So, ooh, actually, this one is kind of like related to making mistakes.
Okay.
Right. This one is non-native English speakers have a smaller range of vocabulary and sometimes use grammar incorrectly. That's why it's better to have a native English speaker as a teacher. That's quite long.
Okay. So, all right. So I'll answer the question this way. This is my opinion.
Opinion.
Opinion means just what someone thinks based on their lived experience. So my opinion is the following. First and foremost, if you were looking for a teacher, I think it is very important to look at a teacher's overall qualifications. And part of qualifications would include general education experience, certifications, educational experience, work experience within English, outside of English. Because yes, I've been a teacher. I've been on social media since 2016. I was a teacher for I've been teaching for over 10 years, but I came from the business world. So I think it's important to look at work experience. And part of qualifications, I think, in addition to that, is skills and talents. What do they bring? Do they have the right personality if you decide to be a teacher? So qualifications is important. Second point, one, people have a preference. Preference means partiality, something that they're inclined to. As an example, I prefer chocolate ice cream before vanilla ice cream. Preference is important. My point, as someone whose mother tongue is English and whose native language is English, one's nationality is has nothing to do whether a person is a good teacher or not. If you don't have the basic skills of teaching and empathy and qualifications, I, whose mother tongue is English, could care less if someone's nationality is native or non-native. That's preference, and sometimes my opinion, based on bias, bias meaning prejudice, bias meaning, like, oh, you're inclined to think one thing, based on bias in the industry, based on bias in terms of how people achieve to be English, they view that native is better than non-native. That to me is a crock of baloney. Final point, because oftentimes, and this is my opinion, English typically, when people think of native, they're thinking about one particular accent, one particular region, and one particular hue. Why do I say that? My opinion. Oh, most people, when they think of native English teachers, they might not necessarily think of me because of my hue. In conclusion, the last part, when you sat back and said, well, a non-native teacher, I'm sorry, non-native individual versus native, they might not be inclined to knowing vocabulary or grammar. Well, listen, there are some native individuals that I know that was lucky to be born in a native English speaking country. Their vocabulary might be as limited or as expansive or as big as someone that is not from a native English speaking country. So, in conclusion, what I would say is this: if indeed you're looking to improve, enhance your vocabulary and your grammar, and you're looking for a teacher, find a teacher that's qualified first. Find a teacher that is able to meet you where you are, has the right personality, has the right temperament. And if indeed that you have a preference between someone over native versus non-native, that's fine. But be very mindful between preference and prejudice. And my opinion is that there is a lot of people either consciously or subconsciously discriminate against non-native teachers versus native teachers. In my opinion, people associate, again, when they think, I'll say it like this, just because someone has a flag, if they're teaching or whatever, and they have a flag that says the United States or Britain or Canada does not make them a good teacher. Final point is this: English is a global international language. And so what I do, my opinion for a sense of integrity is I like to expand the definition of what English can be. I like to sit back and challenge its norms and biases and prejudices and to speak English naturally and be mindful that, hey, you're going to see people speaking English with different dialects, with different accents, with different varieties, and with different hues. So I hope I answered your question.
Woo! That was
I'm sorry, and that's sometimes a little controversial for what I say. That's why I say it's my opinion. I have more
right.
of the way I teach is this. There are students that have come to me, students that have, taken training and development courses with me. Like I finished up a course yesterday, as a matter of fact, called New Year, New You. And I remember that what happened was one of the students came to me and said to me, "Teacher, well, I want to speak like you. I want to sound like a native." And I understand where that comes from. Yet, I'm like, you don't need to speak like me, nor will you ever speak like me. Your goal should be to speak naturally. Your goal should be to, or you have an opportunity for your goal to speak with proper clarity, proper pronunciation. Now, if there are aspects of things that you think that I do well, in terms of my pronunciation, in terms of my vocabulary, in terms of you think that I have good confidence, fine, emulate that and make that. But with all due respect, I am so sick and tired of this conversation between native and non-native and native accent. I'm done. And I could use that because I'm a native English speaker. I could say to people like, you know what? Sound like an American, sound like a native. What for? I'm
Right.
done.
Right. Thank you so much for your opinion. Again, it's an
Thank
opinion,
you.
but to be honest, I share your opinion 100%. I feel like well, you know what? I know that you said you're tired of, having to have this conversation, but having this conversation is what's gonna make the difference, and to
Hopefully, what I would say is this: I think it's in people. My opinion, people can do, you know, again, there's preference. I have no problem with that because I recognize that just by my fact of me, whose mother tongue is English, there are certain experiences or lived experiences that I might not have. So I understand the reason why people whose mother tongue is not English, they say they want to sound like a native, or they say they want to have particular native accent. That's fine. If they want to do that, then recognize what accent that you want. What I would say is I would encourage those individuals that are teaching is to look at their own preferences and their own biases and ask themselves the question, is that really important? Because it goes both ways. It goes from people, in my opinion, native teachers use that as a selling point. They can. There are some native teachers that use that to put down their students. And also, in addition to that, there are some non-native individuals that will tell their students to sound like a native because they might have experienced depression or they might have experienced discrimination on that. Again, my thing is like speaking English naturally and be proud of who you are and bring your culture to the door. And, as much as things change in my tradition within the African, as much as things change as much as things remain the same. Just a quick observation, you will notice, or I've noticed, I should say, when I got on that concept of sounding like a native and speaking English naturally, the amount of hearts and the amount of likes decrease versus other things to talk about. And again, I get it. That's why it's my opinion. Because ultimately, if indeed, final point, when I learned to speak French, I had no desire to sound like a native. And reality is, I would never be a native French speaker. Why? Because I wasn't born in a native French speaking country. So people have to make the decisions what they have to do. But my approach, my methodology, my style is if you're learning English, own the language for who you are, focus on your pronunciation, focus on your confidence. Real talk, there are going to be people that talk about you. There are going to be people that make fun of you. That's their opinion. I'm a native English speaker and I've been discriminated against. People don't like the way that I look or like the way that I sound. That has nothing to do with me. But that takes a certain amount of confidence in learners. And a lot of times people that are non-native are comparing themselves to natives, and with the content that they watch and they absorb, and for those teachers that they decide to invest money in, they are or possibly could be
conditioned to believe that they're less than. When I have my students, I always tell them, you're less than nobody. Never compare yourself to anybody, because your uniqueness in English is just that, unique. And oftentimes we say to learners, and this is why people get mad at me, and that's their opinion. I'll say to learners, I'm like, oh, you're proud of your culture. You're proud of who you are. You're proud that you're Arabic. You're proud that you're Cypriot. You're proud that you're Greek. You're proud of who you are. Then how is it, or have you ever thought about, but yet when it comes to speaking English, you're trying to speak in a way, you're not proud of the way that you speak. You're not proud of embracing your dialect.
Sure, to trying to be somebody else, essentially, right? That you're not.
In my opinion, imposter syndrome.
Right.
Imposter syndrome.
Right.
But let's move on, because, that might be,
Sure.
and that might be
No.
difficult for people to hear. And again, that's just my opinion. That's my approach. But I think it's important that people be proud of who they are, and when they're learning English, to embrace that. And, when I did my training and development course, when people say again, oh, I want to sound like you, I'm like, no, I'm gonna teach you how to pronounce properly. And then based on my lived experience, I will teach you or share with you my experience. When you're facing discrimination, here are the things that you might want to be aware of.
Right. Exactly. Wow. Lots of things I have in mind, actually. I don't know where to start from. I think you've summed it up pretty well.
Thank you.
Well, actually, let me tell you a quick story. Actually, when obviously I'm not a native English speaker. I come from Cyprus. In Cyprus, we have Greek and Turkish as the two official languages, but English is really commonly used in our daily lives in Cyprus, right? So we listen to it, we use it, we even, like in the Cypriot dialect, we say a lot of things in English without even realizing, because, because of history and because of whatever reason. Anyway, the point is that when I first started teaching English, I did have this feeling of inferiority, let's say, feeling inferior, because I wasn't a native, well, I'm not a native English speaker, right? Oops, sorry, just a second, somebody's calling me. Oh gosh,
No
wow, I
problem.
forgot to change oh my goodness, I'm so sorry, what a disaster. Well, this is what happens when you're doing your second live session on Instagram. Let's see, can you guys hear me? Hello, hello, let's see if Teacher Will can join us again. I'm really sorry, I do apologize. Right. Where are you?
Hey, you're back. There you are. All right, hold on one second. Let me
My
flip the camera.
goodness.
There you are. Yeah, no, I sent you a live, and I was like, oh yeah, because of the phone. Teacher Pan, I hope you saved that part, but I want to say I want to touch about something that you said very quickly. All right. You said when you first started teaching that that you felt in the beginning a certain level of inferiority because you were a non-native teacher. And what I would say is this: the power of words, lexicon, vocabulary. I'm so happy that you shared that. And because I do think what happens is that both from a teaching perspective and from a learning perspective, people that are learning English as their second language or their foreign language, they do feel that sense of inferiority. That, for me, is why I'm very mindful, or I try to be mindful of what I say and how I say it. That's why, for me, learning English naturally is more important than learning English natively. That's why, for me, focusing on pronunciation is more important than access. And what I would encourage my brothers and sisters who are non-native individuals for the purpose of this conversation is that you have an opportunity to take a look in the mirror, and it says, don't let anyone make you feel a sense of inferiority. And in my opinion, what happens is based on the content learners that you assume and consume, based on the content that you consume, is that, for the life of me, this is my opinion. Why would you follow anyone? Why would you pay money to anyone that is making you feel inferior based on what they put in their content? And you learners, a lot of you out there, you do it, and then you get mad at me, my opinion, because I'm exposing truths and isms that you're already made aware of. There's no way in the world. It's speaking English naturally. I could sit back as whose mother tongue is English and say sound like me. No, it's not a question of sounding like me. It's sounding like yourself. And learners, when you decide if you want to improve your English, if you want to level up your English, then for me, when I'm training my students, when they're involved in professional development, the only way, the first thing that I talk to my learners about is mindset. Mindset shift, mindset change, being and believing that number one, you are not inferior and that you are worth it. And that you
Definitely.
don't have to speak like anyone except yourself. And recognizing and realizing that, hey, when you do, you'll recognize that, accent discrimination exists, but you can change that. But to feel
Definitely.
inferior about anyone else, no. And final point, I've been there based on things that based on my lived experience. But you're not inferior to anybody.
Absolutely. Do you know what? Thankfully, I've been able to change my mindset, as you're saying, and get to where I am today and be proud and confident of whatever I've achieved and about my work and everything that I've been doing as an English teacher. Um, Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am, I can hear
Yeah.
you.
Okay, great. So, but you need to go through, I think sometimes you go through certain situations and then it takes time for you to realize what you actually need to be doing, how you actually need to
Yes,
be
yes, yes. It's a
acting and behaving.
process.
It's
It's
a
a
process.
process. To learners, I will say this: it's a process. It's a journey, and it's a process in my journey. And the last point I would say, when it's my opinion, which is a little controversial, I give extra shout outs to, I give extra shout outs and praise to people that are teaching English whose mother tongue is not English. Why? Okay, my opinion. There's discrimination. There is native
This
speakerism
is
discrimination.
true.
There is discrimination in this industry. And, if that's not the case, well, I'm sorry, this might be a little controversial, but it's my opinion. There are certain places that if you apply for a job and you don't have the passport that says the United States of America, you are not getting a job.
That's right. That's
And
right.
so that's important for my brothers and sisters out there that are non-native English speakers to recognize and realize the challenges, but yet challenges become opportunities, right? There
Absolutely.
is
Absolutely.
discrimination. There is discrimination. There's
There
discrimination
is.
and I'm a native. Why? Because people associate English as white. But yet it does not mean that you cannot develop your own access, does not mean that you cannot forge your own development. But you have to realize out there that, you know what, if you are non-native, let me say it like this. If you are an individual that does not, from people's biases or people's ignorance or people's prejudice, you will face into like, hey, if you don't look like a certain way that English looks like or comes from a certain culture, right, that you will face certain obstacles, barriers, impediments, challenges that other people do not face. That does not mean that you cannot be successful. And English
Definitely.
non-native teacher put back and talked about the aspect of privilege. We all have privilege, but it's recognizing and realizing moving on from that. So for me, I've done live Instagrams with people that are non-native, native, not, I don't care, 500 followers and 3 million followers, whatever. But what I would encourage people to do is that, again, it goes back to the language in terms of the fact is that why am I going to utilize or use or incorporate vocabulary that's going to consciously or subconsciously oppress another individual? And
Definitely.
in my opinion, you non-native teachers that are out there, you have an opportunity to tell your story and about the discrimination that you might face. But some of you don't, my opinion, is because consciously or subconsciously, you're still walking around here with a sense of inferiority. Teacher
Yes.
Pan, real
Thank
quick,
you. Thank
just to
you.
let you know, I have
Sure.
about 5 minutes left because, sister, wave your hand, wave your hand, wave your hand. Because I'm taking my
Hello.
sister out to lunch, so that's why.
Oh, fantastic. Not to worry, not to worry. I think we can conclude
Ask me
for, I
one more
think,
question. No, I told my sister she knew I got business. I got one more question for you. She's like, I'm hungry. I'm like, sister, be quiet. Good. Thank you, sister. I love you. Okay, great.
so, well, shall I
Give me one more question.
Okay, great. Hold on. Let's see. Well, this is another very controversial, well, maybe not controversial, but another debatable sort of topic. You know, these maybe a very quick answer on this one, yeah, about all of these
Sure.
videos that we see, lots of teachers making videos saying, stop saying things like,
Yeah. Teacher, very quickly, let me say this. Content providers have any opportunity, they have the right to do whatever they want to do. I personally don't believe in don't say, stop saying, just don't say. Those are things that they have a right to do. However, I don't utilize that. Why? Because that to me is not my approach to learning English. Those are something that will feed the algorithm and make people feel as though it's just a marketing tool and a sales technique. They can do it. That's
so,
fine. Learners have an opportunity to challenge that. Why don't they challenge that? Because they walk around in inferiority. So in conclusion, content providers can say whatever they want to say. They're held accountable to their higher power if they believe in a higher power. But that's just not a process that I use. That's stupid. What do you mean don't say very, don't say smart? Are you kidding me? I use smart, I use intelligent, I use clever, I use sagacious based on the experience.
sure,
But
sure,
the only way that changes, final point, the only way that changes is when learners develop a backbone, learners develop confidence, and they say, what do you mean don't say? Because
right.
what happens is that when someone's a teacher, they think, oh my God, I can't question the teacher. Are you kidding me? You can question the teacher.
No,
So
of
that's
course.
what I would say.
Of course, don't believe what I say. Don't believe what Teacher Will says. Do your own research.
Right. Don't
Do
say
your own
this, stop
research.
saying
No,
that, just don't
you
say.
can believe Teacher Will. He's pretty experienced, to be honest.
No, it's
But
not. No, people, no. People, last point, because then I have to go. People don't have to believe me. Again, I share my truth, my
sure,
experience. I
sure,
understand content providers can do anything they want, so I have no right to judge them. I just choose not to do that. What's the value in telling a student, don't say this when you're going to hear
sure.
it in vocabulary? So that's what I would say.
Yeah, so we can conclude by saying everybody, whoever is watching, whoever's going to watch the replay, be open-minded, watch lots of different content, don't follow only one specific teacher, only one specific nationality. Be open-minded, always ask questions, always question whatever somebody's teaching you in a nice and polite and respectful way, of course, always.
Right.
Be tolerant and yeah, and keep learning in a fun way.
Yeah.
And thank
Teacher
you
Pat,
so
let me
much.
say this. Thank you so much. If you ever want to have me back
Absolutely.
for a live, I'll definitely give you an hour for it. But I want to thank everybody, and I hope people found some value from it. And continued blessings to you, and may you continue to grow. All right?
Thank you so much. Have a lovely rest of your day, and I'll
Thanks,
speak to you
everybody.
soon. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye-bye.